Okay, so this is the study guide or study group, and we're going to cover the Ansible Navigator here. So here's where we are in the study guide. So you'll find it if you just search through April 28th, that's where the section that I'm on. So in the Navigator, there's tons of things you can do with it. And I mentioned you can customize it. There's a Ansible-Navigator file that we'll take a look at and just I'll show you a few things that you can customize. But there's all sorts of things you can do. You can mount volumes, locally to access files and do a lot of things to kind of work around the container. So sometimes that's an answer as well. But what you have is like a wrapper around the execution environment container. So here's some links to the execution environments. And again, we'll go in more detail into those later, but you can use existing ones. You can create execution environments. There's just nuances, right, of using them as opposed to your local file system because it's a container. But the value is it's the same container that you use in the controller is what you use locally with the Navigator. So if you're building content in the Navigator and testing it out, then it's going to work in your controller, and you'll have a lot of consistency around that. Now, with the Navigator, there's tons of stuff you can do, so there's links there as well. But we're just going to focus on just the main things today. So I'm going to click here into a new tab, and it's going to bring up a sandbox that I'm going to pull out over here and move it over here and then move this over. Now, this is a lab that's curated, but don't go through this yet. We will in a second, but I just wanted to point out that you can go through this lab and actually do this playbook and go through the steps. We're just using this for a platform that has the Ansible Navigator on it. So we're going to kind of hack this a little bit. So what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and launch our session. Now, sometimes it's a little bit quicker. This one, it actually seems like it's going to take a few minutes. So while this is coming up, I'm going to talk through what we're going to do a little bit. So this is actually spinning up a server for me, and it'll make an environment that I can use. So it takes it a few minutes to spin this up. I believe this is being spun up in Google Cloud. So when that is done, I'll have a VS Code that's running inside this lab environment. So this is not the VS Code that I was using earlier on my laptop. This is the web-based version of VS Code. So some things work a little bit differently, but for all intents and purposes, you will have a similar experience as you would with Microsoft Visual Studio Code running it locally. So we need this to finish so that I can bring that part up. But what I'm going to do is instead of being in this lab environment, we're going to open up a new window. And then that's going to give me the ability to have like the entire screen, and then also be able to interact and use the clipboard to the terminal and things like that. So it's kind of a way to get around some of the curated experience that's in here, where you can only like copy and paste inside the thing. So you'll notice that like when you're in the embedded part versus what we're going to do is a lot different. So I just need that to finish for that to work. But once I have my VS Code set up the way that I want, I'm going to clone down my project. So if you haven't went through the previous labs, what others have done leading up to this point is they've created a repo, and it's their repo. So they need to use, and you would need to use your own username here, but you would create one and call it my project just so it's consistent with the lab guide. And then every time we're building labs, regardless if it's in the Cisco sandbox that we use most of the time, or if we pop over to these labs, we're always able to save our configurations in our own repo. So one of the steps that we have before we stop is to commit those changes and push them, to our own personal repo. So this one I'm going to pull down into this lab environment. And once I have that, I'll have access to some of the files that I've created in the past, like my inventory and some of the other stuff. So I probably should have went in here while we were talking earlier. So I'll remember this the next time we use this. It's going to take like 4 minutes to get this thing to turn on. You will see some pop-ups too, so just accept those and exit out of them. It's just because this thing, sometimes it needs updates or whatever, but it's just the VS Code stuff. Do, 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 do. It's almost there. I did one earlier today, and it only took like 2 minutes. If you're doing this on your own and you're already done, just feel free to kind of go ahead of me if you'd like. And just let us know if you have any questions. But mine's still going to take like another minute. I guess the good news here is that you don't have to fill out a lot of stuff to get access to it. You just have to wait for it is the downside. And there's other labs too. So this is just one of them. If I grab this link right here, and go back, I should see all the other labs. Yeah, so all these are similar. But if you go here's all the Ansible ones, and there's a lot of them in there now. And there's a lot of network ones too. So you can use the link out of this study guide and just remove the last part of the URL and just go back to here, the interactive labs, Ansible, if you want just the Ansible stuff. Hey, it's done. So start. All right, so here's the embedded stuff. So if you wanted to go through their labs, you can follow along here. But what I'm going to do is, well, I have to get rid of this thing. Is File, New Window. And now I just have the VS Code, right? So it got rid of all that embedded stuff. And then the next thing I need is a terminal. Right, so now I have a terminal. So it mentioned here that I'm going to pull down my repo. And just, you have to do this in the beginning to allow the clipboard. So that's not a valid URL yet, right? So I need to put in my username as such. Okay, so now I have my repo here, right? My project. These are the ones that are for their lab, and here's my stuff. So what I want to do is I want to open this up. So the way that I do that is I go back over and open folder and then find it right here, my project, hit OK. Accept this thing again. Now all my files are accessible here in the File Explorer, but I did lose my terminal. So terminal, new terminal. Now I have a terminal. This is just my README file, so don't worry about this here, or you can just get rid of it. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to look at the Ansible Navigator file because this is what I use to configure the Ansible Navigator, or to customize it. So I don't have it here yet, so we're going to create it. I'm just going to use the Vim editor for this part. So in Vim, to insert, and I'm going to copy this stuff over. This is the actual configuration. So whenever you add a configuration into your project, your working directory, if you add it to the root of your working directory, then my mouse is acting funky. It'll override any other Ansible Navigator config file somewhere else. So I think in your home directory is the default for that. So this has configurations how I want it set up. So this here is where my inventory is, right? So that's right here. So that'll point to my inventory, so I don't have to keep telling it when I run the Ansible Navigator command to run the playbook. And then it's using Podman to interact with the container, the execution environment. but you could use Docker, but we use Podman on all the real stuff. This is the image, the container image that it pulls down. So it's pulling it down from my GitLab account, and I created an execution environment that has networking collections in it. So all of the modules and things that I need are packaged into a container. So this is just the image. So the image becomes a container at runtime using Podman, and it creates an Ansible runner. And inside that container is where my Ansible core engine is running. It's not installed locally on this Jumpbox server. It's running inside that container. The other part that's here is artifacts. So if you leave it the default, it's going to create artifact files in your working directory in that project. But sometimes that becomes kind of cluttered. So I'd like to send it to a different folder. So here it's going to go into the home directory, and it's just going to prefix it with the playbook name, and it'll be artifact and a timestamp. Every time it runs that artifact, it'll have that naming convention, and you'll be able to find that back in the home directory, so it doesn't take up space here. So it's just easier to not have to go through so many files. So I want to save this, so it's escape :WQ. The bang is when the file is already there. So you can use it. It doesn't do anything this time, but just remember that if you have like a file that you're going back to. So WQ bang. So I've saved it in there. So now I have a Navigator file. So I can run it. The first time I run it, it's going to be a little bit slow because it has to pull that container down. So Ansible Navigator is going to bring up what we call the TUI. So that's a text menu. Now, before it does that, it has to pull the container down from that registry. So you'll see that on the screen here. It's pulling it down. That's what all this is. It's pulling down this network-EE off of my GitLab. Because if you're not aware, GitLab is not just a Git repository. It's also a container repository. So just a completely different purpose. But there's other repositories you can use too. Like Quay is like one of the Red Hat ones. And then I mentioned when you have your private automation hub, then that's where you can make that the focal point for all your execution environments and your collections as well. Yeah, unfortunately, that does take a couple minutes. So it's done now, and I have the menus up, right? So what it wants me to do now is to see what collections are installed. So that's one of the options on the main menu. So this is one of the ways to do this. You can also use command lines. So when you're in the TUI, if you hit colon, and then whatever you want to do, so collections is what we want to see at the moment. These are the available collections in that execution environment. So here's like Cisco routers. We're going to use this for the iOS. And I've got, like, this is my network one. So I have, Arista, and Juniper, and F5, right? So just the main, networking vendor stuff. Now, when I want to get out of this screen here, I can hit escape, and it takes me back to the main menu. So from, excuse me, from the main menu, it wants me to take a look at the image. So this is looking inside that container image and what's available and what versions of things that are installed. So this time around, it wants me to go back to here, and I'm going to go into images. So I have this one image that we're using, the network-EE image. So for me to drill into that, because I'm in the TUI, I have these indexes that I can use. So 0. And then I want to see the version information for the Ansible core engine in all the collections. So I can select 2. So it lists it out for me. And then here's the Ansible that's running in the execution environment. That's important because sometimes you're at a point where there's a dependency on, like, a new collection would require a certain rev of the Ansible core engine. So sometimes you have to update that as well. or you have it set up to pull the latest. Sometimes it's the opposite, like a newer version doesn't work with an older collection, so you want to pin those and have like specific versions that you create, and that's done in what we call the Ansible builder. So moving forward, here we're going to mess with the inventory. So I need a different inventory because we're not in that same lab environment. We're going to point to the external always on Cisco DevNet router, as opposed to the CML one that we normally have to connect to with a VPN. So because of that, I got to modify the inventory. So to get out of this to the terminal, you just escape your way all the way out. Now I'm back to the terminal, and I want to look at this inventory because we're going to modify it. This is, if you don't have this, this is something you'll do in previous steps before this in the lab guide. But this is the inventory that we use in the other environment. So do not delete this. You're going to need this for other labs. Insert, enter. And then these are new entries here. So this is, that's why you have a fully qualified domain name here. These are available directly on the internet. Now I did notice, I think they changed the user name for this guy. For the iOS, I think it is admin now. So I'm going to change that because I don't think it's going to work. And I'll fix it here. We'll try it, but I don't think it, I'm pretty sure they changed it recently. So paste these in. And just make sure everything's over. And so that looks okay. It's just, I'm just going to go ahead just in case because I'm pretty sure it caused a problem. Skate, WQ, bang. All right, so I have that in there. And I'll have to, let me make a note of this. Change admin. Or maybe I'm thinking wrong and that's not going to work and that is the right one, but we'll find out in a moment. So now that I have an inventory, we can look at the inventory from command lines, but we can also look at it from the TUI. So if I go back into the Ansible Navigator, and then inventory, this is where I mentioned you can access those same sections from the command line, but it's going to bring up the TUI. Did I misspell something? Oh, I put a YAML. There. All right, so from the TUI, I can look at groups and hosts, sort of like we do from the controller. It's kind of organized like that as well. So you can just go in and review. So if I hit 0, it'll show my groups, and then I can drill down. So one of the ones that we just did was DevNet. So click 1 there, and then I have iOS and Nexus. So 0 to the iOS, and then 0 to go into that, and I can see what we set up. So here my username's admin. So I'm not 100% sure this is going to work. I might have to go back and fix this back to the developer, but we're going to see what happens. So so that's what it looks like inside the TUI. Another thing we do is exit all the way back out to our command line, and we can use the Ansible inventory command because Ansible is installed on this particular environment. And we can check to make sure that our inventory builds properly. So we can use this graph option. So this is just like a check that you can do just to make sure that there's no syntax issue with your inventory. Right, so it shows you kind of like in a tree format, right? All your groups, your parent-child groups. And then we have these two groups under DevNet here, the ones that we care about. So if it had syntax, we would have an error here, so we're okay. Don't worry about these invalid characters. That's because we're using dashes. And Cisco has like their topology, and they use dashes, so consequently, it's easier to do it that way to make it look the same. So on the Ansible side, And when you get into like the stylistic stuff in Ansible, it would prefer you, or it actually recommends strongly to like not use dashes for any of your group names. But it still works. But that's why you'll see these warnings. So we have an inventory. Now what we're going to do is run a playbook. So we're going to create a playbook. So what are we naming this playbook here? Or do I already have this playbook? Basic YAML. Is that already in here? Yeah, we already have this playbook. You may not have this playbook. This is from a previous lab. So if you don't, and here's those stupid pop-ups. If you don't, then you would just have to create it real quick. So in this playbook, we're going to talk to Nexus switches, and we're creating 2 new VLANs. There are existing VLANs in that device. So we're not going to cause any disruption or anything because the default in a VLANs resource module is merged. So we're going to add our VLANs, but we're not going to remove any existing VLANs. Now, if we were to change this and explicitly put a state of replaced or overwrite, then we would go in and we would actually cause some problems if there was VLANs that need to be there. But we're going to be good DevNet citizens and just merge our stuff in so it doesn't cause any problems. So we'll see these 2 VLANs added. So that's what this config is here. If you don't already have this, you can just copy this out and save it as basic.yaml. So how do we run a playbook in the Navigator? You saw that earlier. There's 2 different ways. We only looked at it this way with the run, and then basic is the name of this playbook, and then -m std out, standard output. Now that's the normal way that we would look at playbooks when we run Ansible-playbook, right? So it looks the same. So I'm going to run this. And actually make this a little bit larger. It might not be connecting to the Nexus. Wonder if they changed anything there. So that one. Oh, this has a different. Hopefully this is the right username. I might have to go to their page and see what they have it set for. But normally it should already connect by now. See if I can get to it. Should just be able to get to like a web page. So it's saying it's admin. And this. Yeah, those work. This is just like the normal default GUI for that. So what was its problem? Oh, these are local ones. So what did we have in here? Oh, I didn't follow my own directions. This is to the other lab, these hosts. So if you look into our inventory, where's our inventory? Further up, right? No, not that far. Good gracious. So in DevNet, we have Nexus OS, right? So that's what it should be here. And what I mean, let me clarify. The Devnet Always On DevNet versus the DevNet CML sandbox that we use with the VPN. That's what that other group would have worked for. So I need to change this to the Nexus OS group. And I probably said that in here, I just didn't read it. Oh, it's right here. I'll put a note to make sure that yeah, change the host to Nexus OS, but I'll highlight that because I didn't even see that. So bad me. Right. So Control S, save over here, and then we'll run it again. Yeah, there we go. See how it's yellow? We changed it. We added our VLANs. So if we run this again because it's merged, we should only have OKs. We should only have OK. We shouldn't have any changed because that's where it's idempotent. So this time we're going to run it inside the TUI. Switch it up. So paste. It should finish here in a second. We'll be looking for green over here. Successful down here. Complete. Yeah, so green complete. So to see what happened, we have to drill into it because we're in the TUI. So if I go through 0 and then 0 again, then here is the information, the verbose information from running that playbook. Now, one thing you can notice here too is that we also see the before configuration because this is a resource module. It does a before and it does an after, and it shows the exact config lines that are sent. So in the before, all these other VLANs were in there. So it's good that we didn't delete them. So we added 5, or no, we added 4, right? Names. No, we added 5. And I think we added 10. Or yeah, 10, right? Yeah, we added this one. So 5 and 10. So we left all these other ones alone. So all that verbose information is available in the artifacts. So all this stuff that we're drilling into, we can still access it later, but it's nice because it gives us all this in a structured data. Like every time you run a playbook, you capture all this information, so you don't have to do any screen scraping or any of that kind of stuff or logging. It's just there by default. But you can change it, right? So there is logging levels you can change, and I changed the location of where it's saving it. So that to find this, like if I escape out of this one, you'll notice that we didn't have any changed, right? We only have the OK because the whole merging and the idempotent part of it. So if we get out of here, escape, 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 and then if I do ls home directory, oops, ls the home directory. Was it going to the home directory? Let's see what it says. So back here in our files, and we were over here in our config, home playbook name. I'm not sure why I don't see it. Maybe back one more. Or where the hell am I? PWD. I'm in home rel. I guess it doesn't let me go back. Yeah. Here we go. Then it was. Is that a hidden file? I should be able to find it. Anyone Linuxy still on? Well, they're there somewhere. It'd be the home directory and then the playbook name. So the home directory should have been that rel one, right? Yeah, this right here. Why don't I see it? LS dots like the hidden ones, but it's not like that. Yeah, I'm not sure why I didn't do that. Oh, what level? Debug. Yeah, so the level 2. So if I change this to something else, I think if it's just critical, it should show every playbook. Well, save. But now I need to get back. Sorry, I'm all wrong directory now. We're over in my project. It's definitely not saving them there, so that part does work. Navigator, run, basic. -mstdl. OS home. Yeah, I'll have to look into. I don't know why. Maybe they have something funky set up to where I can't see that. But it's definitely not saving it here locally. But to me, it just seems like it should be in this folder, right? All right, so we'll come back to that. I'll do it locally on mine and figure it out because I'll have full access to everything in my Ansible Navigator. All right, so another thing that we want to do here is run an ad hoc command. So to do that, you can copy this out because it's a lot to type. But in the previous lab, we did some ad hoc commands from the command line, from the regular command line using Ansible and then the module, right? So we can do that in the Navigator. We can continue to do that. So the way that it works is paste. I'll let it run. Right, so this is just so I can do a show VLAN command. And I'm running it in that container. So here's all those interfaces and stuff. But if I scroll up, there's I should have filtered it a little bit more. Well, let me make this larger so it'll look better. It's still kind of funky because of all their interfaces. But we can see that we have the ones that we did, right? So here's 10, and we also built 5. Now, how that worked, and you can see how I'm in this bash, is we used exec. This allows us to run commands in that container. So let me up arrow key. Can't see the whole thing. Let me paste it in again. Paste. So you can see here that we have the exec command. So let me scroll up. Hopefully there we go. Yeah, so in this one, can I make this bigger? Yeah, that's a little bit better. Hopefully I'm not getting anybody dizzy, if there's anybody still out there. So in this particular one, we have the exec command. So with using the exec, then I can run commands in that container. So what we're doing is in this, and maybe it's easier if I just show you from the documentation too. Get that out of the way. I can scroll across a little bit better here. So in that exec, and then Ansible is the command that we would normally run from our like directly when we have Ansible installed and we're running like Ansible-playbook, and if we run the Ansible command, then we can interact with modules directly. So we can do that in the Navigator. It's just we use the exec instead of run. So when we're running a playbook, it's the run command. So it's exec when you want to run a command in the container. And then Ansible, because we want to run Ansible module. And then we have to tell it the inventory, because now we're not reading this Ansible Navigator YAML file, because this is being executed in the container. So we're like unaware of it. So we'll point to the inventory that we want explicitly, and then explicitly we will tell it the module. So we're running the Cisco collection for Nexus OS. So this is just the fully qualified collection name. So cisco.nexusos.command. So it's the command module in the Nexus OS collection. And then the argument -a is we're going to run commands, right? So same as like when we're in a playbook, we would run commands, and we would then provide the actual command with proper syntax that we want to run. The last part of this is the group in the inventory. So this first part here is really the same, like when we're running it locally. The only difference is, that we have the exec and we're running it in the Navigator. So you can do this with other commands, that you want to run on the inside the container. Like maybe you want to see what Python files are installed. So get to the bottom of this, and I could do pip list. Right, it shows me all the Python files, just like would do locally on my box, on my shell. So anything that you want to see in the container, you can see it when you run the exec command. So I think that's it for today. And actually, we went over a little bit, so I'm sorry about that too. I should have paid attention to the timing. But we'll come back and we're going to look at roles and conditions and start digging in like deeper into the constructs that we can use within our playbooks. So we'll switch gears again and go back into the Cisco sandbox next time. But we will return to the Navigator periodically, because not just the Ansible network automation certification, pretty much all the Ansible certifications are updated to use the Navigator. So you need to be able to use both, the Ansible playbook commands and also the Navigator. So you're going to want to become familiar with both of those. And then eventually it'll just be the Navigator, into the future at some point. So with that being said, let me come over here and see if anyone's brave enough to still be out there. And I do commend you for staying on this long. So that concludes everything. So before I drop off, if anybody has any questions or anything about that lab we just went through, feel free before we close this out. Cool. All right. Well, have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you next time.